TV on the Big Data Show. And what we are going to be talking about today is some of the trends from the bubble. And we will be previewing the 4 games that matter for tomorrow's docket. And thank you for joining me today. And I do want to let everyone know ahead of time, this is my first experience ever streaming about any topic, whether it's sports or any matter. So bear with me as I try to gain my bearings and learn how to manage this streaming for the first time. Now, I'm sure every bettor has had his or her own experiences with betting on the bubble. These games have been incredibly difficult to handicap, and I think everybody's just trying to do the best we can. And I do want to point out today that if you do go and use the promo code CHAN, you will be getting 25% off BetQL subscriptions. Now, what you get from subscribing to BetQL is you will get access to the model. For example, the model will give you projected scores from certain NBA games. It will rate whether this game is a 5-star game, or this is a 5-star bet or a 4-star bet. For example, in the over in the Heat Thunder game that just concluded an hour ago was rated as a 4-star bet, which means that it's a projection that's considered to be particularly strong, with 5 being the strongest and 1 being the weakest. So if you had placed a wager, if you had followed the model on the Heat Thunder game, you would have cashed. If you would have followed the model, or not so much the model, but the recommendation made on the BetQL website that you would have gained access to if you subscribe, you would have been able to cash as well on the Sixers-Raptors game. The Raptors were favored. They did end up prevailing, but the Sixers did end up covering despite taking the loss in that game. And one of the recommendations on the BetQL website today was that the bet should be made on the 76ers. So if you want to subscribe to BetQL and gain access to the model, which also it will also give you the ATS records of every team, the over-under records of every team. It will also give you insight into how the professionals are betting. It will give you insight into how the public's betting. You can subscribe and you can get 25% off if you type in the promo code of CHAN. Now, I do want to go first talk about some of the over-under trends that we've been seeing from the bubble. And the average score in the bubble is over 231 points. Just to put that in context, the average score for a Portland Trailblazers game all season is 230. So the average game in the bubble is seeing more scoring than an average Trailblazers game on the entire season. So what that means is that there's been an exponential amount of scoring among the teams that are left playing basketball. Now, we only have 2 more days left. We have 11 games left with the Clippers-Nuggets game pending. But the over-under thus far is 42. I have it scored based off of the closing lines as 42-32 and with 2 pushes. And quite frankly, the over is probably doing better than that if you go off the earlier numbers. So the over has been an incredibly profitable bet thus far. If you had just blindly bet the over in every game, you would have been profiting to the tune of 6 or 7 units thus far. If you've been betting the under, you probably haven't been successful very much unless you've been selective in the way that in the games that you've bet. But the over has been an incredibly profitable bet, and that's stayed the case through a couple weeks of basketball now. I think that there was an assumption that once the better players started getting rest, because the games became more and more meaningless as playoff position, and doesn't matter as much this season as it has in other seasons because there's no home court advantage. Well, even the quote-unquote bad players or the deep reserve players nowadays can score. They can all shoot. And now that they're getting extended play-in time, that's the one thing they're going to be focused on. So even though we're seeing more playing time for players who would normally not receive it, we're still seeing scoring stay incredibly high nonetheless. Now, in terms of ATS trends, the favorites have not performed well. Favorites, following the conclusion of the Thunder Heat game, are 36 and 37 with a couple of pushes. So it's not just because favorites have been winning and just not covering. That's only happened, by my count, 9 times in the bubble. So most of the time, on the underdog, when the underdog's covering, the underdog is won outright. So it has not been a particularly profitable experience to bet the favorite in many cases. So those are the trends that we've seen thus far. But whether or not they will continue as we move towards playoff basketball, that's another story. Arguably, some teams were not playing as hard because playoff position has largely been set in stone for many teams. So we'll just have to see what happens with the scoring, and we'll see if favorites are more successful in covering as we go into playoff basketball. Now, the reality is there are only 4 games left in the bubble that really matter, and they all involve the 4 teams that are still fighting for a spot to enter into the play-in tournament in the Western Conference. Those games are games involving the Portland Trailblazers, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the San Antonio Spurs, and the Phoenix Suns. So those are the only 4 teams left that have anything legitimately to play for. There is some playoff positioning that can still be garnered through a couple of games, but in terms of actually getting into the play-in tournament, there are only 4 games that will matter to determine who is still going to be playing basketball past Friday. So what we have tomorrow is we have the first game that's going to start at 1 p.m. Pacific on my time, but I have it for East Coast listeners. That game is going to commence at 4 p.m. The first game on the docket is going to be the Grizzlies versus the Milwaukee Bucks. And the news came down that Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to be suspended for this game for headbutting Moritz Wagner in the Bucks-Wizards game from last night. So the Grizzlies are going to be receiving a break in the sense that they're going to be facing a Giannis-free Bucks team tomorrow evening. On the season, the Bucks without Giannis are 5-4 straight up with a point differential of plus 5.1. Now, the next question is whether or not Chris Middleton is going to be playing, since this game doesn't matter. The Bucks have clinched the first seed, whereas the Grizzlies pretty much need to win. They don't necessarily need to win to get into the play-in tournament, but if they win, they're going to enter the play-in tournament. Maybe not as the 8th seed, but they will be in a play-in tournament. They're trailing the Blazers right now, but if they do win, they will at least secure a spot to enter the play-in tournament. Chris Middleton may not play either, so the Bucks without Middleton and Giannis, that only happened one time this season against the Denver Nuggets, and the Bucks did lose that game by 14. The Bucks have not played particularly well in the bubble. They're 3-4. They still have a positive point differential. The Grizzlies have just had a miserable time in Orlando. They're 1-6. They have a negative point differential of minus 3.1, but that's somewhat misleading. They did have one huge victory against the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's skewing the average. So their actual point differential in losses is minus 8.5. So when they've lost, it hasn't been particularly close. Jaren Jackson was injured early on during their bubble experience, and the Grizzlies have just had a miserable time shooting. They're shooting 44.7% from the bubble. They were a team that was shooting 46.8% from the season. Their offensive rating of 107 is the 5th worst of any team in the bubble. And field goal percentage doesn't tell you the whole story. You can overcome a bad field goal percentage if you shoot or you're able to connect on a lot of 3-point shots. But the Grizzlies are simply not a 3-point shooting team, especially without Jackson. They're only averaging 10.7 3-point field goals per game, which is certainly not enough to overcome what they're shooting from the field of 44.7%. I mean, John Morant has probable rookie of the year. John Morant has struggled mightily in the bubble. He's only shooting 48% from the field. He's shooting 25% from the 3-point line. Those numbers are well below his season averages. He was shooting 49% from the field before the season restarted, and he was 36.7% from the 3-point line. So their Grizzlies' best player has struggled with shooting the ball, which has led to the whole team struggling shooting the ball. One potential impact player that you may want to consider for those of you who are into fantasy sports or who do that, you don't need me to tell you that, that Chris Middleton's really good, you should draft him, or John Morant's good, you should draft him. In terms of a low-cost guy that you may want to consider drafting if he's available for a low price is Grayson Allen. He's probably the one player in the Grizzlies who has exceeded expectations in the bubble. He's gotten more opportunities, and he's actually averaging 14.7 points in the bubble. He's shooting over 53% from the 3-point line. And the Bucks are a team that allows a ton of 3-point shots. They are allowing 47 3-point shots per game in the bubble. Teams aren't hitting that many, but that's how many attempts the Bucks are allowing per game. So you would have to think that Grayson Allen, of all the Grizzlies, he's the one who's going to be shooting a lot of them. So that's a game at 4 p.m. Another game that's going to be happening at 4 p.m. is the Suns Mavericks game. Now the Suns are undefeated in the bubble, and they've been pretty much unbeatable. Well, they have been unbeatable. They have had some close calls though, but other than that, the Suns have been the talk of the town in Orlando. With that said, they still don't control their own destiny. They need some help tomorrow. And if they will only get in if they get a loss from Memphis or Portland. At least that's my read on how the win percentages are going to go. So Phoenix, for all of their success and for even all of Memphis's struggles, they're still going to need some help tomorrow, and they're going to have to face a pretty good team in the Dallas Mavericks. But we don't know who's going to be playing yet for the Mavericks, and there are no lines available right now, as at least when I last checked 20 minutes ago. So we don't know if the Mavericks' better players will be playing. So the Mavericks have nothing to play for. They're stuck in the 7th seed. And if you're wondering how have the Mavericks fared this season without Luka Doncic, and the answer is they've actually done pretty well. They're 7-7 without Doncic, and their point differential is positive in those games. They have a positive net differential of 4.14. They've averaged 114.5 points in the 14 games that they played without Doncic, and that's only about around 3 points lower than their season average. The Suns have been able to succeed not just due to Devin Booker, but because opponents are just missing shots against the Suns. Opponents shot very well against Phoenix this season for the most part. They've shot 47.3% against the Suns and 36.4% from the 3-point line. And the Suns were bottom 10 in the league in both opponent field goal percentage and opponent 3-point percentage. But in Orlando, those numbers have fallen to 45.2% from the field and 32.4% from 3. Those numbers would have been the 3-point percentage would have been even lower before the Sixers in the last Suns game shot very well from 3. But before that game, opponents had been struggling to even hit 30% from distance against the Suns. The Suns rank in the top 10 in both opponent field goal percentage and opponent 3-point percentage in the bubble. So we have a kind of a rematch from earlier in the bubble between the Mavericks and the Suns. That game came down to the wire. But one thing that people should remember about that game is the Mavericks held a big halftime lead. They held a double-digit halftime lead on the Suns before collapsing in the second half. The Suns are 7-0, and the two games that went down to the wire were the one game against the Mavericks and the one game against the Clippers when Devin Booker hit a fadeaway, amazing shot to win the game at the buzzer. The other 5 Suns games have not been particularly close, and that's why the Suns have a point differential of over 11 in the bubble. But the reason why those two games were so close is because the Suns were lost the free throw battle by double digits in both games, and that's one way teams get. The Suns have a reputation for fouling a lot, and a team like the Mavericks can get to the free throw line very easily, especially with a player like Doncic. So if Doncic is playing tomorrow, I would expect a close game between the Suns and Mavericks. If he's not, then the Mavericks probably won't get to the free throw line as much as they would normally, and it's probably going to be. The trends show that it's going to be another Suns victory. I'd guess that the Suns are probably going to be favored in tomorrow's matchup. It's just something that would have seemed shocking at the start of the bubble. The next game is a couple hours later at 6:30, and that is the Spurs Jazz. And the Spurs basically need more help than any team. They're the 4th team. They're not out of it, but they need 2 of 3 teams they need 2 losses from the 4 teams that we're talking about. The Spurs have been very fortunate, and they've played well in the bubble, but they've also had an opportunity to face the Jazz when the Jazz rested pretty much their entire lineup about a week ago. The Spurs had an opportunity to beat the Rockets without James Harden when the Rockets decided to rest him. So the Spurs arguably were gifted 2 victories, much to the chagrin of the other teams who are competing against them in the bubble for the final for a spot in the play-in tournament. But the Spurs have been dominant offensively, to their credit. And some of the things that amazes me about the Spurs is their ability to generate offense without the 3-point shot. And the Spurs San Antonio is averaging 122.4 points in the bubble. Their season average is 114.1. But to get a load of this, they're only averaging 27.4 3-point attempts per game. Just to put that in context, that's 50% of the amount of threes that the Rockets take per game in the bubble. So the Spurs are shooting half as many threes as the Rockets are, but they're still putting up 122 points per game. They've been dominant from the mid-range. They've been led by the king of the mid-range jumper, DeMar DeRozan. DeRozan is shooting a mind-boggling 58% from the field in the bubble. The Jazz have been a mess in the bubble. They've had trouble generating offense. They entered the bubble as one of the best shooting teams in terms of their 3-point percentage and in terms of their field goal percentage. They were elite. They were top 10 in field goal percentage and either tied or a little bit behind Miami in terms of 3-point percentage. They've struggled on both ends. Of course, they're coming in here. They came in the bubble without Bogdanovic. Bogdanovic is arguably their best shooter, and they haven't been able to find anybody who could duplicate his offense. So again, the Spurs did beat the Jazz just a week ago. It's unclear who's going to be playing for the Jazz. There's arguably still some playoff position in that it's unclear at this time if there's any playoff position still at play for them. But the Spurs, they need a lot of help, and they might actually be eliminated by the time this game starts, since they need 2 of 3 games. So I would, before considering placing a wager on a game, you want to see how the first 2 games go between the Suns and Mavericks and the Grizzlies and Bucks. Otherwise, you're going to be betting on a team that might not have anything to play for in the Spurs. The final game of the evening falls into the same category in the sense that you might want to wait for this team. You may want to wait for the outcome of the earlier games before you place a wager on this one. And that's the Blazers Nets. It's the final game it's the final game of the 4 games that we mentioned. The Blazers have been red hot. They've been the over team of the bubble. They are 6-1. The over has been hit in 6 of their 7 games, and in most cases, the over has been hit easily, when you haven't even needed to worry about it for much of the fourth quarter. But the Blazers, they may not need this game. May not matter by the time it gets to them. They only need one. They only need 2. They control their own destiny. And if 2 of the 3 teams have lost before them, let's say the Mavericks beat the Suns, and let's say the Jazz beat the Spurs or whatever, then they don't need to play for anything. They can just rest all of their starters, and they won't. We probably wouldn't even see Dame time in that scenario. But again, this is another game where you're going to want to wait to see the outcome of the earlier games before placing a wager on this game. In case you're curious, the Blazers, without the Blazers in the bubble, have been one of, as I noted, they've been one of the most. They've been one of the easiest bets to make in terms of an over, but they've also played incredibly close games. 5 of their 7 games have been close. 2 of them went to overtime, and 5 of them were arguably decided in the final minute. So against a team like the Nets that also has nothing to play for, the Nets are firmly entrenched in the 7th seed, and in the Eastern Conference, they'll be facing the Toronto Raptors in the first round. So this is a game where the Blazers are likely going to be heavily favored, but keep in mind that most of the Blazers games in the bubble have come down to the last minute. And the stat that I was trying to get for you was the stats around how the Blazers perform without Damian Lillard. The Blazers are 2-6 without Lillard this season for a differential of -4.5. One thing I'd also consider in this game is that everybody seems to shoot well against Portland. I know Portland's played well. They've managed to win 5 of their 6 bubble. They've won 6 of their 7 bubble games. They've won 5 of their 7 bubble games. I'm sorry, 5 of their 7 bubble games thus far. So they've done really well, and they're probably going to win this game. But keep in mind that opponents are shooting an incredible 48.5% from the field and 43.5% from the 3-point line against them. Teams don't seem to miss when it's the Blazers. So that's your preview of tomorrow's games. Again, if you want to check out BetQL before you decide whether you want to buy a subscription, you can go. There's a free game that's provided every day. The free game that was it usually hits, to be perfectly blunt with you. A 5-star bet or 4-star bet, it means that the game scores incredibly well. So this is the type of information that you can get access to with a BetQL subscription. So if you want to type in the promo code, Chan's my last name, so you'll get a 25% off the subscription. You should never make a bet just on the basis of what a model says. You want to do your own research and use the model to supplement what your research has said. So in a close call, maybe the model can push you to make a decision, or maybe push you off a bet. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me this evening. I hope this show will get better as I get more used to talking to a screen. It's a new experience for me, but this is the Big Data Show on QL TV. My name is Alex Chan. My Twitter handle is Ian Lazaran. You'll see the bets that I make, so you can tail them, you can fade them. You can probably fade them recently. I haven't been doing particularly hot in the bubble myself, but fading them has been probably a good bet for you. But if I do get hot, you'll want to go tail me, and you can tail me at the Twitter handle of Ian Lazaran. But the promo code is Chan if you want to get 25% off a BetQL subscription. Thank you for joining the Big Data Show. I'll be coming back on 11 o'clock Eastern time on Friday night when the the bubble season has concluded and we'll be going into some playoff basketball. So thank you again for joining me, and have a good night, sports fans.